Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Business of Filmmaking. My name is Natasha Kimani. I am the head of partnerships and research at Africa No Filter. Thank you for giving us your time and for being here. Today, my amazing guest is director and producer Victoria Thomas. Just a few housekeeping rules as everybody joins the call. Please introduce yourself in the chat. Tell us who you are and where you are joining us from. And please join the conversation on Twitter at Africa No Filter. You can use a chat to make comments, but please use the Q&A chat box at the bottom of your screen, and I will get right to it. My guest for today is Victoria Adeola Thomas. Victoria is a filmmaker, researcher, and educator of entrepreneurship in the film value chain. She has worked on a variety of film and TV projects across shorts, features, and television in both the factual and fiction space as a producer-director on narratives that explore the experiences of people of African descent. Most recently as a factual producer-director on the Queen Cleopatra series on Netflix. She's interested in economic equity in the film business as it relates to the diaspora communities across Europe. She's a course director and lecturer in the entertainment value chain and law across the value chain on the MA International Film and Business at London Film School, a lecturer in producing at South Bank University, and an external examiner at Aberystwyth University. She also delivered talks and workshops on the film value chain. She's moderated several panels. She's been on the jury for BIFAs and the Athena List, and sits on the board of Film Africa and the steering committee of the Anti-Racism Task Force for European Film. She's an alumni of several things: Juklava's Emerging Producers Program, Berlinale Talents, and many, many more. She's an incredible force, and what a privilege it is to have her with us. Victoria, welcome. How are you?
I'm good. Hi, Natasha. Thanks very much. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining.
I'm going to now gently hand over to you. And as we do that, we request for you to respond, for our audience to respond to the poll questions. But in 2 seconds, away to you, Victoria. I look forward to listening to you and seeing what you have in store for us today. Over to you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Natasha. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Great. Okay, hi, everybody. So as Natasha said, I'm Victoria. I am joining you all from Glasgow in Scotland, where I'm based. Thanks very much for joining from all the different countries that we've seen on the list. I'm going to try to talk about the business of film in the next 30 minutes. I have to start off by just being honest and say that this is a very, very complex topic. So I am going to breeze through a lot of information, but hopefully leave a lot of time for us to just have a bit of a discussion through your questions at the end. So I'm assuming that most of the people in the room are filmmakers or producers or executives working in the industry. And of course, when we talk about business, especially film in very different countries, the value is both at times cultural and economic, but also at times it's purely cultural. And for some people, it's purely economic. I live in the UK, and in Europe, largely because we have a lot of public funding, film can be seen as more of something of cultural value. Whereas if you look at the States, where it's the studio system, the Hollywood studio system, it's largely an economic thing. It's about money making, and you probably see that as well in some of the African countries, for example, Nollywood in Nigeria. So I think one of the things I wanted to say as well is that for everybody in the room who's interested in the business of film, I think that you need to just bear in mind that success means different things to different people. And because the industry is so complex and there are just so many avenues that you can go down, it is very possible for you to find the niche that works best for you. which is why I've just had those two posters here of two very different films from Africa. One, Happiness is a Four-Letter Word from South Africa, and Rafiki from Kenya. Now, both films are successes in their own right, but their route to success was very different. Happiness is a Four-Letter Word was very much a commercial success in South Africa, but it wasn't a commercial success in the UK, and it wasn't supposed to be. But it did break the mold for Black producers and actors and for Black-led South African films in cinemas. Similarly, Rafiki did quite well on the international film circuit, went to a lot of prestigious film festivals, and did do a lot to increase the profile of Honori as a director. So I think it's important as we're going through this, because a lot of what I'm saying is going to be quite generic. And I also don't want anybody to feel like everything has to apply to you, because also with the different African countries, we know that the infrastructure and the support for film is very different and the landscape is very different. But from a business perspective, regardless of where you are, film is a product. You know, we're manufacturing something. It's just like my glasses. For it to get to me in the stage, you know, somebody had to design it, then they had to get the parts and assemble it and test it and etc. before they could sell it and market it. And it's the same with the film. And so in the business, you'll always hear people talk about the value chain, and the value chain is something that happens in pretty much every industry. It's just the steps that you have to go through in order to have something that is actually worth investing in, or what that people are going to pay you for. And that's the film value chain. So today, largely, I'm going to talk about the business of film, predominantly through the value chain, just walking you through what happens in every stage of it. And then in some cases, I will also use some examples. So the value chain, like I said, it's just like a series of steps that you go through to create a product. And we're going to look specifically at film, which I've sort of tried to summarize in this diagram. So we've got here development, finance, production, distribution, and exploitation. And the reason why you see legal and marketing across is because the legal and marketing is something that probably happens in every stage of the film business. And those are two things that if you neglect, it will really affect the value of your film. So what I'm going to do now is just also talk you through the journey, the ones that I've summarized here, just take you through the very different sections. But again, I also need to stress that every single film has its own journey. All of the films and TV shows that I have worked on, whether short or feature, documentary or fiction, every experience has been different. Like the stages are the same, but the experience of every film is different because the story is different. The audience that you're trying to reach is probably different. The people that are likely to fund it is different. Is it an existing brand? Is it a franchise that you can do a sequel on? Is it an adaptation of a book? Is it an original idea that you have to really convince people on? Do you have famous actors in it or not? But every film's journey is different. So regardless of the difference, however, the key things, however, that all films need is something I call the power square. So we've got like the idea, which is what's the film about, the talent, like who's involved in it, could it reach an audience, and also do you have the money to make it a reality? Because even as I sit here today, I have ideas for lots of films. And the reason why they're still ideas and they have not been made is because it's not yet financed. So as much as you can have a really good idea, you also need the resources and the team to be able to bring it to life. So hopefully over the next half an hour, I can talk you through the value chain. And we'll start off with development. And development is simply the stage where you take an idea for a story and then you turn it into a valuable film project that's worth investing in. I'm pretty sure that if I put a log line in the chat now and give it to everybody and say, come up with a film, everybody in this room is probably going to take the same idea and come up with a very different narrative, because largely when we write, you will write from your own perceptions of the world, you'll write based on your own gaze of the world, you'll write based on your own fantasies, your own imagination, your own fears, etc. It's one of the reasons why I think people like Africa No Filter exist, and a good reason why they exist, because we also see that when a lot of people tell stories about Africa or Africans, there's a particular perspective and gaze that they bring to these stories that sometimes us as Africans don't even recognize or get fed up of, because we know that there are a lot more diversity. There's a lot more diversity in our experiences. So it really all starts with an idea, but then the question is, can you take an idea and turn it into something that somebody is willing to invest in? Now, where do ideas come from? Like, ideas are all around us. The majority of films that are made, I think about 70% of successful films are actually book adaptations. There are lots of films as well that are articles in newspapers. I'm working on a TV series now that started off as an article in the newspaper. I saw it in the newspaper. It read like a movie because it was just so facetious. And then I went to research it and then sort of found this really incredible world where I was then able to sort of imagine characters and reimagine the world. So, I mean, then you also have people just doing something from just like their own imagination. You can imagine people and places. That's the beauty of fiction writing. Anything can happen. Your life, you can also have incidents in your life that can make a very good film. There are lots of public figures or events. I mean, Oppenheimer has just come out, as we know. I don't think there's a single year that we don't get a film about World War II. I mean, there was a period when we had lots of films from Hollywood about South Africa, all about apartheid. And then, of course, music. If you take a film like Mamma Mia, which is a very successful film franchise now, it started off with the music of ABBA. So it's really about finding ideas that appeal to you. And then, of course, with the thing with ideas, of course, is that anybody can have the same idea that you have. So how do you make it unique to you? How do you have the rights for it and permissions, especially if you're doing things like books or articles? Those are things that you also have to be aware of, which is why legal is something that you will find that you're using throughout the chain. So these are just like, examples of some African films, all of which are very, very different, like very different genres, very different tone, different countries. Pretty much all of them are like original ideas. When you take something like Sheikh Jackson, it was literally somebody making a film about somebody who is really in love with Michael Jackson. But there's ideas basically are all around you. So really there's nothing stopping anybody from coming up with an idea. The only question is, can you turn it into something valuable and take it out there and be more than a simple idea? So, which means like the process of development at times is very long because you have to review probably very different ideas. You have to iterate the idea that you have. You have to get the rights. You might read a really good book or an article, and if you can't get the rights, you probably can't do anything about it. So you have to spend a lot of time trying to secure rights. You also have to find ways to protect your ideas. Especially on the African continent, we know that the intellectual property laws are not always on the side of creators. Costs for suing people can be prohibitive, but also different people can also have the same idea. So you also have to make sure that when you come up with ideas, you find a way of protecting them, make sure that you speak to people that you trust, or that you have a paper trail that proves that you wrote a script. For example, always ensure that you have contracts or even agreements, even if it's a simple email, just make sure you document things to ensure that an idea can be traced back to you. But unfortunately in film, you cannot own an idea. Nobody owns the rights to World War II. Anybody can make a film about World War II. You just need to find the spin that you're going to put on it. Anybody can probably make a film about a famous figure. You just quite simply need to find a way to access the idea. There was the controversy a couple of years ago about the film that was about the life of Nina Simone, starring Zoe Saldana, which the family did not approve of. But the filmmakers did have the rights to a book written by Nina Simone's manager about his time working with Nina Simone. So even though they could not get the rights to the Nina Simone story, they found another way to tell the Nina Simone story. Of course, in that case, because the family was not particularly supportive of the film, it also meant that the PR was really negative. And in a lot of ways, it ended up affecting the performance of the film. So also when you do find films and you do find ideas and you're trying to get rights, especially if you're dealing with true life events, remember that even if you do everything legally and you have the rights, especially nowadays when we're also dealing with social media that can be largely unregulated, people's emotions can also impact the way your work is received. In addition to having a good idea, you also need to find a writer and you need to fund the writing. And I stress this because I always say if it's not on the page, it's not on the stage. Like, you need a good script. When we watch films, most times when you watch films, the films that really move us are the films that have a really good storytelling, regardless of what country they're from, regardless of what genre it is. When you watch a good story, you can tell that you've watched something that's really, really been crafted incredibly well. But a good script needs a good writer. A good writer needs time. And time is money. You do need to be able to fund development. And as we know, on the African continent especially as well, there isn't a lot of development money outside countries like South Africa, where there is a government-supported film funds. So where do you get money to develop these ideas and turn it into like a script that could be valuable? Mostly government culture funds. There are labs and workshops that you can also apply and get into if you're not from a country that has a film fund like South Africa or say like Morocco. There are people who also do cultural philanthropy. So there could be grants as well. Of course, they're very competitive. You spend a lot of time having to fill out a lot of applications. Rejection is a reality. And you could also have private investors. There are also lots of writers who fund their own work by working in other jobs and then using their free time when they can find it to craft scripts. But what you also have to remember is that whenever you take money from people, even if you don't have to pay the money back, there's something that they want, and that's the reason why they're giving you the money. So you always have to pay attention to the legals. When you get an investment, whether it's a grant or whether it's equity, make sure you're clear on what people want back. I have worked largely on co-productions between Europe and Sub-Saharan Africa, and the recurring problem that I have seen are people not understanding how the European grants often work, because people assume that because it's a grant and you don't need to pay it back, therefore there is no obligation. But most times people give you money because they want something in return, and you need to be really, really clear what that is. So generally, when you get the things that you need to be aware of, and so that you can make a decision whether it's something that works for you, is that depending on where the grant is coming from or the lab, they might have their own perspectives. They might have their own gaze on the story, on the world. They might have things that they're passionate about, sorry, and they've spotted you as a talent that they want to back because they feel as though your vision aligns. They might have a preferred way of doing things. But they might also offer a route to market. You have some reputable labs like Sundance. It's linked to a festival. Rotterdam Film Festival also has some labs and markets. And most times you see that people who've gone through their programs will have their films premiering at their festivals, which are some of the most prestigious in the world. It doesn't always follow that if you go to a lab, say Cine Fondation, it means your film is going to be at Cannes, but it also means that you're visible in the eyes of a lot of people in the international market. People who give equity generally will want some form of ownership. People who are investing in film for money also generally think about audiences first, because they want to make sure that whatever you make, they can sell it at a profit and get their money back. Also, at times, experienced film investors will have access to a network or relationships that you don't have. Because the film business, whether we like it or not, it's a relationship business. It's been in existence for a very long time. And some of these infrastructures are really rigid. As much as people talk about change, the pace of change is not as rapid as the talk about change. So a lot of times when you come into these spaces, you probably have to play by their rules. And so you really need to be clear about what it is that you want, but also perhaps work with people who have these existing relationships that can help you navigate it. And I also always say, what's 100% of zero? If you want to come into the business and be successful, I guess based on your own definition of success, if you're trying to reach the international market and have some real impacts with your film, whether cultural, whether economic, you probably will find that you'll go further if you're collaborating with people who've done it before and who have access to the network and the sort of success that you want to emulate. So through the development process, it's always kind of checking, like, did you really add value in the development? Because you can spend a lot of time in development. I mean, there are lots of projects that die in development. Development at times can feel like the place where projects go to die. Like, you could spend time in development, and I've done it before. And as part of the process, you just kind of think, this is actually not going to go anywhere. It sounded like a good idea at the time, but actually thinking about it now, it's not really a film, or maybe it's too big for a film, it's a TV series, or it's better off as a documentary. There's a film called The Lunchbox from India, which started off as a documentary. That filmmaker wanted to make a documentary about people that deliver lunches in India. And whilst he was doing the research, realized that actually it was better as a film. So development is also a place where you really give yourself the opportunity to see whether or not this is something that you want to spend the rest of your life on, because films will stay with you forever. When you finish making it, it will exist forever, and it will continue to exploit it forever, unless, of course, you sold it to somebody for complete and buyout. But in development, when you come out of a successful development process, you should have a package that is investable. So do you have a fundable script? Did you get any selections from reputable labs? Because that could also help with your routes to market. Did you have funding from reputable brands, where they're like film funds on board? Because film funds also have access to a network. They also do a lot to market themselves and the projects that they fund. And so by having a film fund on board on your project, it could also help you in terms of getting it to audiences. Do you have verifiable interest from cast and crew and other partners that people recognize and know as experienced and established in the business? Do you have like a clear chain of title, which is just contracts and rights to show that you own what you say you've developed? For example, if you're adapting a book, it's highly unlikely somebody is going to invest in it if you cannot show that you have the permissions to do the book. So always make sure that your legals are in order. And then, of course, the finance plan, like, where will you get the money from to make the film? Now, in the world of independent film, most times, well, not every single time, I think every film is financed in a different way. I think the studios probably are the only ones, or people with vertically integrated companies, where they have their own funds that they can then quite simply green light something and then get it made and get it to audiences. But if you are an independent filmmaker and going out to raise money, chances are you're going to finance the film based on the structure that works for that film. And for a lot of independent films, it is probably the most difficult. And when we talk about films in Africa specifically, I will refer to the continent a lot, just because the models there can be so different. Unless you're living in South Africa, where you've got a National Film and Video Foundation, and then you also have regional funds where you can apply to, chances are you're relying on private investors, or you're relying on some of the streamers or TV channels, which we know don't pay as much and also have some really harsh rights requirements, or you're looking to some of like the foreign European labs, especially from France and Germany, that tend to invest a lot in African cinema. But independent film finance is probably like the most difficult stage, and it has nothing to, it's not a reflection of you, and it's not a reflection on the project. It's just a very hard thing to do, especially now that the market has changed quite drastically. So who finances films around the world? You do have the government film funds, which I keep referring to, but of course you have private investors. In Africa now, especially, more and more banks are coming up, but of course they do have very rigid terms which are not realistic for the average filmmaker. There are grants and foundations. There are also NGOs that finance films, but as we know, NGOs also come with their own agenda, and most times they're looking for films that can help them amplify the issues that they are set up to eradicate or support, etc. And a lot of times as well, a lot of filmmakers fund films themselves, depending on whether or not they can afford it. And people can also rely a lot on in-kind donations and brand placements. But most films generally will have a finance plan that is a combination of different sources. And it's about identifying who is likely to fund the film that you're working on. Now, some of the European public funds are available through co-productions. I think most European countries have some sort of a minority co-production fund. The UK was one country that did not have one, but even now there's one, the Global Screen Fund. But in order for you to access these funds, most times you will need to get a co-producer from that country. And most of these co-producers as well will need some form of rights in order to be able to apply to the fund to get money for you. And depending on how much money they're bringing into the projects, they may also want some creative involvement. So again, you've got to think about your legals. If you get a co-producer and they're bringing money in, just really check what they want in return, and then make a decision as to whether it works for you. Most times the eligibility criteria, actually all of the time, the eligibility criteria for European public funds is on their website. So this is something you can access yourself and read and see what the process is. Don't take funds or co-producers and think that you can change the process halfway through, because that's not going to happen. I have worked on one such co-production where it became quite thorny because the filmmaker did not realize that in order for us to continue to access the money from this particular European country, they would insist on crew from their country. And that was always in the eligibility criteria. They thought that perhaps if they got to know them, they would change their minds, but it just does not work that way because it is a government fund, and that's what we had to do. And so in that particular case, even though there was a lot of money raised for the film, that particular film fund from that country also wanted a co-director from their country attached to the film. And of course, that director brought a very different, it's very different telling an African story when you've grown up in Africa, in a specific African country, to when you've never been there. And so suddenly we then had, as producers, we then had to deal with trying to reconcile the two directors because it was the only way to keep the money. Production, of course, is the stage where you actually make the film. That generally means that you've got the money or some of the money to take you through. And usually then you're having to attach a cast, you're having to hire a crew, manage the crew, and then solve problems. Now, when you're attaching cast, the cast is one thing as well that can be seen to add value for your film, because again, some actors are sort of well-known. It means that sales agents believe that they can sell the film a lot easier. Audiences will want to see the film because they already know that actor and they're fans of the actor. So if you're not working with like well-known actors as well, that can make it harder for you to sell the film. And then you probably need a lot more PR and probably success at major festivals. And when you go to production, of course, you're dealing with pre-production, production, and post-production. I mean, as filmmakers, these are stages that you already know about. Pre-production is pretty much where you try and close your finance and attach everybody that you need and everything that you need. And then, of course, you also work out your facilities and make sure you have money to pay for all of it. You're also dealing with a lot of risk here. There are films that start off production and don't finish because there's no money to complete it, or there is a disaster halfway through. I think we all know some of the well-publicized stories recently of the Alec Baldwin film, for example, where unfortunately somebody got killed with a prop gun because it wasn't checked to make sure that there was no live bullet in it. So again, if you're a producer, you're also having to make sure that you can get through this, the filming process and the post-production process on time and under your schedule, and making sure that nobody's harmed in the process, especially increasingly so now because we're hearing so much more about dangers on set, but there is a real liability there for you as a producer if something happens to somebody whilst they're working for you. Contracts, of course, will always be important in production because, again, you want to be able to have the right to use the film when you're done. And especially in things like documentary, if you don't have the right contracts and release forms, you can end up filming a documentary that you're unable to show anywhere. So again, I just used like an example of these two films that are recent films just to show the difference in how cast can add a perceived value. So I've used CJ Obasi's Mami Wata, which is actually, I think, just going out doing its cinema run now. It's a film from Nigeria, and I've used Little Mermaid. Now, both of these concepts are pretty much very similar in terms of the myth of the mermaid, right? But one is very much a Hollywood perspective, which obviously was also a Disney cartoon at some point. And then Mami Wata, this famous West African fable. Now, it's the same myth, but when you look at the journey of the two films, it's a very different value in the eyes of the industry. One is Hollywood, it's Disney, it's a brand in itself. There are people who are going to watch a Disney film just because it's Disney without knowing what the film is about. And it has a famous singer as the lead actor. Mami Wata from Nigeria, on the other hand, is a much smaller film with a much smaller budget that has the cultural specificity of the West African mythology in it. So even the production design and everything is different about the film, even though they're dealing with the same concept of the mermaid. This is the posters of Half of a Yellow Sun, same film. One of the posters is from the UK and the other poster is from Nigeria. And if you look at it, the only difference is that the cast that's visible on the poster is very different. So in the UK, it was Chiwetel Ejiofor and Tandy Newton. They're both British, known to British audiences that the distributor was aiming the film at. In Nigeria, you can hardly see Chiwetel and Tande on the poster. And instead, the actors that were centered on the poster was Osi Ukeche, Genevieve Nnaji, and Patience Sokwa. Because of course, Nollywood Nigeria has its own star system. And these people were going to get more people into the cinemas than Chiwetel and Tande. So again, value is relative. So when you're also packaging your films, just think about the audience that you're trying to reach with your film and which actors are likely to appeal to them. How do you get a well-known cast? You need to hire casting directors. At times, we undervalue the value of some of these professions, but casting directors, especially the experienced ones, they will have relationships with actors and their agents. And so paying a casting director could actually get you an actor that will come on your film if they like the script, if it is well written, and if you have a good team around you, and their presence could actually add a lot of value to the film and could make it be seen as something more valuable in the eyes of like sales agents or even festivals. I was reading like the list of films that were selected for Venice Film Festival this year, and what was quite amusing was that almost every feature that was listed was directed by a well-known actor, because even the festivals are all looking for so-called star power, because they have to survive, they have to attract advertising, they want to get press, etc. So it's really, really important. Your package and people feeling as though it's something that can also give them some traction is really, really important. Sadly, it's no longer just about the craft of filmmaking. And then the production, to be honest, production can be tricky, but in a lot of ways, it's probably the easiest way. It's probably the easiest stage of everything because you have your money and you have the people and you can get it done. But of course, the craft is also quite important. I have two posters here, which again is from, one is a film and one is a TV series, but it's the same story. So Glamour Girls is a very old Nollywood film, and it was recently remade as a TV series, I believe, by Netflix. And the reason why I have these two posters here is just like the craft does matter. Early Nollywood, as we all know, was known for sort of like the video quality production. It was almost kind of like the charming bit about watching some of the older films and seeing the boom in the shot and everything. And now we can also see like the growth of Nollywood. And when you look at Glamour Girls, like the two Glamour Girls, you cannot actually compare them in terms of craft. And so the craft does matter. So it's good to make independent films, make it on your phone, do whatever you need to do to be able to establish your practice. But if you're thinking about the business and you want content that could really perform well in the business, you have to think about the craft and have to make sure that the people who are making the film with you have the skills that you need to make a good quality film. Because no matter how great the idea is, if the sound is poor, the picture quality is poor, the editing is choppy, it is not going to travel as well. Audiences are not going to pay money. They might watch it online for free, but they're not going to pay money to go to the cinemas to watch the film. So the craft does matter. And then, of course, the next stage on the value chain is distribution, is how does the film get shown? And there are lots of things in the equation, like the trade press, things like Hollywood Reporter, Screen Daily, Deadline, Variety. These are places that the film industry people read. Film festival curators read them. So then they start tracking films when the films are in production, and then meet with filmmakers at markets, etc. So also going to film festivals and markets is quite important. It can be expensive, and it is, sadly, the cost can also be prohibitive, but some of these festivals also have like labs as well that can provide support in getting filmmakers and new execs to these festivals to experience it, build your network, and also begin to engage with people and talk about the work that you're doing, so that you're able to go to them when your film is done or when you have funding for a film and you need support to get it through to audiences. And then, of course, there's sales agents, and then sales agents usually will sell to distributors in different territories, and then distributors will then work with the exhibitors in their different territories. At least that used to be the traditional model. A lot of that is now changing with the streamers, but of course, that also depends on whether or not the streamers are active in the country that you're in. Now, the trade press is something that I think it's important to pay attention to, because they do add value to a film before a film is shot, during the shoot, after the shoot, and also when the film is ready to screen. If you read Hollywood Reporter, Variety, Deadline, they're all free. Screen Daily, I think you can get some articles free per day, and then you have to pay, but you can read most of the stuff free. You always see people announcing when they've raised finance or when they've attached an actor. We've also seen lots of people put out press releases, but we've never seen the product come out. So it can also be a bit of a thing where people are consistently sending out press releases, but never really doing anything. But the press release also gives visibility to what they're doing. And people, for some reason as well, when you're in these, when you're featured in these publications, they do take what you're doing seriously. Like I said, we've seen a lot of people put out press releases and never followed through with the project, but the trade press is really a valuable part of the process, and it does kind of add some value. In order to get to the trade press, you do need a publicist, and they do cost money, or you need to have good relationships with journalists, or you work with producers or sales agents and distributors who already have these relationships, because then they will do it for you. But being in these publications gives your film the visibility to the potential partners in the industry that you're going to need to be able to get the film over to the finish line. And so film markets and film festivals, again, is something that's quite important in that process of distribution. If you're lucky to be in a country where there's support to go to film festivals and markets, take advantage of it, because at film festivals, it's literally where you build a network. Because like I said, the film industry is it's pretty much based on relationships. You know, people sadly kind of have to know you, and it's one way, and meeting them at festivals is one way of them getting to know you. Being a part of the festival programs, labs, training is also a way to meet these people, but it's like a look that you're consistently doing. I think my first festival was when I did Berlinale Talents back in 2008, I think. And I've been going to festivals since, but every year my festival experience is different as I get to know people more, as I get to know the landscape more, as I do more work. But it is a good thing to be. Similarly, just going to festivals for the sake of it, it's not necessarily a good idea. It's a lot of money. If you can afford it, by all means do it. They can also be fun, but also when you go to festivals, especially if you're interested in the business, go with a very clear agenda and try and target people who are interested in the sort of thing that you're doing, and build a network that could help you to take your work over the finish line. Another thing about film festivals is, like, there are about over 10,000 film festivals around the world. But there's an organization that actually manages festivals, and they only accredit 47 festivals worldwide, because festivals can also be a bit of a business. And if you go on Film Freeway today to send out your films to festivals, there are lots of festivals all asking you to pay entry fees. Not every festival is worth the entry fee, because at the end of the day, the industry pays attention to probably less than 100. The ones on the FIAP list, the 47, are probably like the most reputable festivals, where if you say your film has been selected there, it means something. They're also the festivals that the trade press is likely to cover. They're festivals that sales agents and distributors go to. And if your film wins a prize there, they're more likely to pay attention to you, especially if you're making films on the African continent. International film festivals are probably incredibly important, because they are seen as a pipeline to content and the zeitgeist on the continent. And if you think about, like, the major film awards, which people seem to associate with success, whether it's an Oscar or BAFTA most times your film has to have screened, especially with shorts, it has to have screened at one of these reputable festivals for it to be even considered to be entered into the festival, into the prize. And of course, with Oscars as well and BAFTAs, you also have to have like a certain number of cinema releases for you to be even considered. It's not, you don't necessarily need an Oscar or BAFTA or need to aspire towards that, but in the film industry, they are sort of seen as the pinnacle of success. Regionally, there are also lots of other awards everywhere, but again, it comes back down to what kind of filmmaker you want to be and where in the business you want to play. What does success mean for you? If being a BAFTA nominee or an Oscar nominee is an important thing, then you have to be targeting those festivals that they pay attention to. Similarly, getting a film into a major festival is not a guarantee for commercial success. These are 4 African films that traveled well at festivals, and they're very good filmmakers. Felicité by Alan Gami, I'm Not a Witch from Ghana's film, Soul Boy, Our Esman, Before Boy, Chikanadu. These are all incredibly well-crafted films. Like Before Boy, for example, was developed through Cine Fondation, the development lab at Cannes. But it is definitely a cultural success. It's definitely a very good example of craft, but it did not do the business of Moonlight. I don't necessarily think that the filmmaker was trying to do that either. But at times, people can also assume that if your film gets into Cannes or Berlinale, that will translate into money and economics. It does not necessarily mean that. So again, we're going back full circle to where we started. It really comes back down to what's important to you. There are people whose films have never been to reputable festivals, but they're doing incredibly well. They have a career that they're continuing to make films from, and they're making money from films. In the UK, there was a filmmaker called Rapman, who did a Blue Story, which started off as like being online, and it went viral and did very well online. And that feature came out and went directly to the cinemas. It wasn't at any major festival, and it did incredibly well commercially in the festival. And the filmmakers and producers have all gone on to continue to work in the industry. Similarly, I know filmmakers who've made a first feature that was awarded at Berlinale and Cannes and are not making films anymore, or are still looking for money to make their second film 10 years later. And then the next stage of the chain is exploitation, is like where the film gets seen. There are usually lots of avenues, the most obvious, of course, being cinemas. And then they, of course, used to be DVDs. I think some people still use DVDs. The DVD market is sort of dying. Now we're having a lot of streamers, and then there's TV. And a place that people normally overlook is education. Libraries, especially in film schools, they do buy a lot of films. And then you have the hospitality sector. If you're on a flight, airlines, you have access to movies. There are hotels that have access to movies. And these are all different places where you can actually get your film seen and monetize it. Now, how widely the film is seen, however, depends on the target audience and also the access to distribution and the audience's access to the film. We've got to think about something like the streamers if we think about sub-Saharan Africa, there are lots of countries where people are not watching Netflix and Disney and Amazon for the mere fact that the broadband technology is not as smooth and it's also not as affordable. So if you're making a film in, I don't know, say Sierra Leone, and you're saying, well, it's going to be a Netflix movie, chances are Netflix is not paying attention to the marketers. We know, for example, they specifically are paying more attention to South Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, and probably soon Ghana. But you need to think about the audience that you're making the film for and where they have access to watch movies, right? We also know that there are not that many cinemas in a lot of African countries, or the cinemas are quite concentrated in the capital cities or the larger cities. If you're going to TV, you probably need a distributor or an aggregator to get you to TV, unless it's a scheme where the TV is buying directly from you. And when you think about the ancillaries, like if you're selling to education, to the libraries, you probably need specialist distributors. But you need to think about the type of film as well and who it's likely to appeal to. Again, when you're putting the film together, so that you are able to make the film at a monetary level that you can actually make some money back. So traditionally what people would do in order to get their money back is you get a sales agent, and then the sales agent will go around and sell it to different distributors. And then the distributors for very specific countries will sell it to different platforms, different TVs, whatever opportunities available locally. And that will continue for the rest of the life of the film. That is being disrupted a lot now with the streamers, because some of the streamers are asking for the IP buyout completely, which means once you sell to them, you can never sell anywhere again. But you need to make sure that the money you sell the film for is higher than what you made it, because otherwise you're going to make a loss. We know that there are some really established TV stations in sub-Saharan Africa that get a lot of content from locals and sort of have kept the market going. But we also know that they don't pay that well, and they also ask for your IP outright, which then means that a lot of people even having to put their own money in their films or TV series just to get it over the line and bring in advertising and brand placement, et cetera, et cetera. But, and hopefully those business models can be disrupted in the future, but for now, that is probably the reality. So, and also if you don't make the film for a lot of money, then the craft and the quality is probably going to be low because you can't afford everything. So it is a gamble and a decision that you have to make, whether or not, how many of those you want to do in order to create the track record for yourself to be able to attract the right budgets to make something that you can sell for an amount that can keep you working in the filming business. The streamers are sort of like creating a bit of an opportunity, as we know, where they're paying probably higher than what some of the established channels on the continent have been doing. But we also know that they do pay African filmmakers a lot less than they pay filmmakers everywhere else. The excuse is generally that the market still needs to grow and they need to get more subscribers before they can invest more. But currently we know that they only seem to be interested in South Africa, Nigeria, and maybe Kenya, and probably, who knows, Ghana, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. And so there are way more African countries like that than that, or rather than those. So if you are not in these three countries, you're probably not benefiting from the Netflix Africa or Amazon Africa strategy that they're going on about as yet. And we don't know when you will be, because of course we also know that broadband technology in a lot of countries is not yet as affordable or as smooth. So you probably then still need to target the international labs and have access to sales agents and who have to be interested in the sort of story that you're telling and believe that a wide audience exists outside your country for them to take it on, or to give you things like minimum guarantees, which is an advance on whatever they think they can sell it for. The TV monopoly, of course, we know that at the moment, Canal Plus, Mnet probably do dominate on the continent a bit. A lot of people do have access to them in their household and the Showmax app. Even I have a Showmax app, and there's a lot more diversity in the content that we see there, the stories that we see, but generally they do pay much lower fees and they do buy out the IP, which means that once you sell it to them, whatever money they've paid you is the only money that you'll ever get, and you cannot use that idea anywhere else. And of course, you have to be in a country where they are interested or believe that there are enough subscribers there for them to benefit their business. So I think on the continent, the smaller the country that you are in is probably the harder the business of film is likely to be for you without international support. And then how do you make money back, if any? All of these people who take the film, sell the film, they will all expect something back. They will take a cut, and then they will pay you what's left. You've got to be very careful. Again, you have to watch the legals to make sure that you've read the agreements and you know exactly what everybody's taking and what you're likely to get back. I know in the UK, for example, for every pound at the cinema that a film makes, only 10p comes back to the producer. So because there are just so many middlemen to get to audiences, and every middleman is going to take a cut. A lot of this is largely about fiction, but to be honest, documentary and animation have like a very similar process, but there are also some differences and specificity in how you reach the international market, because documentaries also have their own specialist festivals. Some of them are also quite reputable. They have their own routes to market. Documentary also does a lot on TV. I did a feature documentary once where that went down the festival route, but then we also cut a shorter version for Al Jazeera's Witness Strand. So it was 80 minutes and then 52 minutes, and it was literally the same film. But you wouldn't do that necessarily with a fiction film. Animation, especially in Europe, can also have its own labs and its own funders as well. So whatever you are interested in, again, just going back to the value chain, just think about what you want from the process, what you see as success, and try and understand how that particular market works, and then try and see how you fit into that market or what additional support you need to be able to navigate it successfully. Now, just briefly, I just want to talk about the continent of Africa. Just briefly, again, every country is different, and the film funding from governments really only exists in a handful of countries. And there are also just a handful of African countries that have co-production treaties with Europe, which makes it probably much easier to access European funding, even though I know in those cases it's still quite tricky because of the sharing of intellectual property, the sharing of rights, depending how much the country brings in, et cetera, but there are some. I think South Africa is probably like the easiest African country for most European countries to co-produce with. But even then, you don't necessarily see that many European countries and South Africa co-productions, because co-productions are really tricky to pull off. The streamers, as we know, they're not focused on every African country, still a very significant minority. So the value chain for filmmaking in Africa at the moment, I think it's still very individual to filmmakers and to the country you're in, and also based on your own, I guess, your own economic capacity. Training in craft, we know, is still not very widespread. So to get the quality of films that you could probably sell internationally, you probably have to buy in a lot of talent from the countries with more established film infrastructure. We also know that there are lots of issues with intellectual property and people being able to protect their ideas or feel exploited after they pitch to more experienced people and later on see their content on screen without them, and not necessarily having a legal system that will allow them to fight it effectively. So this all kind of goes back down to just thinking about who your film is for, what film your film is like realistically, whether or not you have the rights to the idea. If it's your idea, can you realistically protect it? What skills do you have? What skills do you need? What funding is accessible to you? It's always good to start locally. And then, are you willing to partner fairly to attract more funding or expertise? If you co-produce with people that you don't get on with, it's going to be painful at some point. So it's probably not worth doing it. If you don't have a network, how can you build a network effectively and efficiently? And realistically, how much is your film worth? You know, if you're working on a very tiny story with actors that are probably very good, but probably are not very well known, and it's not going to be easy for you to market them, you don't need multi-millions of dollars to make that film, because you're probably going to struggle to sell it. So just be realistic about how much your film is worth. And I did some research to see if there were African stories that had been made by Africans that had worked internationally and were a commercial success. And I found the top 3 African movies, which shows that, yes, it's possible for you to tell a story from an African country and it can actually go global, even get an Oscar nomination and make some money. And the top 3 African films that are the most successful are these 3, and these are the 3 filmmakers. So it's The Gods Must Be Crazy, was made for 5 million, gross 200, Tsotsi, 3 million, gross 11.5, District 9. District 9, I believe, was made for 30 million, gross 210 million. I put the photos of the filmmakers there because there's also complexities of the film industry that I think it's very realistic for people to pay attention to. I don't think it's a coincidence that all of these films came from the South. I don't think it's a coincidence that all of the directors are men. I don't think it's a coincidence that all of them are white men, because we are in a business that is very, very, very complex. And it's not just about idea, money, and ambition. You can have a very good idea, you can have money, you can have an ambition, but there's an infrastructure at the moment that's very, very much geared towards the West, towards Hollywood and towards Europe. And even within Hollywood and Europe, there's a reason why you hear things like Oscars so white or BAFTA so white, or why you have the strikes going on now. That you're dealing with more than product and good ideas. And so to successfully penetrate something that's been going on for so long, and something that we know the industry, even though it talks about change, the change is not coming as quickly as we should, because for it to change, people have to create space. And to create space means that they have to give up power and let other people in. And that is not happening quickly. That doesn't mean you shouldn't try, but it's just to be realistic about the fact that you could have a really good idea, you could have a lot of money, and you could have really good talent. I'm sure that there are lots of African filmmakers coming out with some really great stuff, but there's a reason why the 3 most successful African films are the ones that we see. District 9, for example, had, I believe, was Peter Jackson attached as an exec. So when you're dealing with Peter Jackson on a movie, of course, you're going to have access to a lot of things that the average independent filmmaker is not going to have. So I would say that have good ideas, work out money, get a good team around you, but you also need to understand the dynamics at play. And one way of just being safe in those dynamics, I don't think it's ever safe, but one way of just creating a safer space and a less risky space to navigate it is to probably collaborate with people that understand it, but that also means that you also have to be willing to share space. Natasha, I don't know how I'm doing for time, but we could probably pause for questions now.
Absolutely, we are over time, way over time, but the presentation was fantastic. It was so jam-packed. I was taking notes. I'm not a filmmaker, but I was taking notes as a future filmmaker. You may have just converted me, Victoria. Usually I ask questions, but because we are short of time, I'm going to get straight to the Q&A.
Okay.
There are so many questions. I'm going to try and do them justice. So I'm going to begin with those that I think are easy to go through. Christine Githiomi, which are the reputable festivals on the African continent?
Okay. So there are not that many festivals on the continent, period. I think probably Durban Film Mart is probably, I think their short film prize is an Oscar qualifying prize. I believe so. And I think they're probably the only one. I know, Afrifa in Nigeria, Chema does a really good job there, but I'm not quite sure whether it's academic qualifying yet. So I think with the African festivals, obviously FESPACO has been there forever, and it is definitely has a very good legacy. Zanzibar at one point as well was really punching its weight. Definitely the North African ones, Marrakesh, because again, Marrakesh is run by a lot of people who used to be at Cannes, so there's a lot of connections to the European festivals. I think I've heard a lot of really good things about Carthage, and I've never been, but I've heard a lot of really good things about Carthage. So I think that it depends on what you're looking for, okay? So if it's about getting African audiences to watch the film, I would say definitely Afrifa is a really good one in Nigeria. Durban is definitely a good one in South Africa. I think ZIF is a good one for East Africa. But if you're thinking about festivals that would put you in the pipeline to prizes or European labs, then you probably need to be looking at the European festivals. I mean, if you go to the FIAP page, it does list the 47 festivals that they support. And I honestly don't think there's a single African festival there, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, great. Tabang Mlabane, let's say you've shot your short indie film already. How do you go about marketing the film effectively without the connections of a publicist?
Well, hopefully you saved some money from marketing and all the money didn't go to the film. That's what people
What if you did?
Then fine. Marketing is something that people always underestimate. Like marketing is just as important as your cinematographer.
Yes. Right?
Because again, festivals are so overwhelmed with submissions. If you look at the statistics, like people like Sundance are getting like 10,000 shorts for like 30 places.
Oh, wow.
Right. And most times when you go to festivals, you meet these programmers because they're also going around watching films and inviting films. So by
Yeah.
the time that you are sending your film in, they've probably programmed about 90%. So they're probably looking for less than 1% of what comes through Film Freeway.
Yeah.
So if they've never heard of you, they've never heard of the film, they're not going to be in a hurry to watch it. And
Yeah.
now a lot of festivals have like programming teams. So then they have like lots of freelancers who are just watching films and grading them. So if your film does not get a high score, chances are it's never going to get to that.
Yeah.
Right. So having you could also have an executive producer who is experienced and who has those relationships, who might be able to send it to programmers and curators and get them to watch it. There are also like lots of completion labs where they do completion funds where you can send in your rough cuts, because because there's just so much content, people are not necessarily being lazy. I think they're working smarter where they then use places as the filter.
Yeah.
Right. So that's one of the reasons why DFM is good, because a lot of people go to DFM from like the other festivals and labs and they use that as a pipeline. But it also means then that the people that are coming through are people who have the kinds of films that DFM would play. And we also know that DFM as a festival, Dave, has a taste, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
You know, so if you're probably making the rom-coms, you're probably never gonna get to Dave to get, you know what I mean? So
yeah.
So having a marketing strategy and saving money for marketing it's something good to do. An executive producer, but it's not something you can escape, especially now where there's way more content that the industry needs.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I'll also request, if you have questions, please type them in the Q&A chat box. I'm not looking at the other chat, so please type your questions in the Q&A chat box. There's a question here from Wordsmith Well Said. I love the handle. If I put up a film on YouTube, for example, and I later want to negotiate with an aggregator or distributor, does the film having been publicly available prior reduce the value for me?
Because it depends on how many people have watched it, right? Because if you have a platform, you want content that not many people have seen, because that's the reason why
That's true.
Your platform.
That's
right?
true. Yeah.
Yeah. So if it's been everywhere and everybody's already seen it, from a pure business perspective, it's not as hot as if it's something more exclusive.
Yeah.
Right. I definitely know people who've had stuff online where they've not been able to get it somewhere else because it's already been online and been publicly available. Because also, if it's on YouTube, somebody might have downloaded it. It's probably on a website somewhere. So people do, like, even festivals, they don't necessarily want to know that you've screened everywhere else, unless you get a prize, then you become the film that every festival wants, because then they can also use it for PR to say, oh, this film is really hot. Like, they also have it. But other than that, because there can also be a fear of missing out. So you do have those years where there are films where it's almost like Emperor's Wears New Clothes, where don't know why people like it, but it's like one festival that's important said, this is great. Then suddenly everybody wants this great thing, but everybody's kind of sitting there kind of going, yeah, I really don't get this, but we've got to say it's great.
Yeah. Thank you. Omar Kibolanga asks, how can African filmmakers create a viable business within the continent without over-dependence on the West? So
I call this Black Stories, White Money, right?
Black Stories, White Money. I like it.
It is, you need Black money. You need African money.
Yeah. That's
pretty much the reason why the European film industry punches above its weight, is because it's government money. Right? The Europeans don't have to go anywhere else other than to another European country, and it's through the EU. We all have a co-production treaty automatically, right? So you can tell whatever story you want to tell if it's European, because the commissioners get it, the funders get it, right? But when you come from outside that space, so if you have that infrastructure on the African continent, then you don't need to go anywhere else. But we don't have it. We've got people like Afreximbank coming in, and then the bar is so high that they've put for their funds. And it's like, how many African filmmakers realistically can pass your eligibility criteria? It's like, it's a joke. It's like, it's either you don't want to do it or you don't understand the industry enough. So you need the money locally. I think that's where South Africa does well. And I know it's not a perfect system, but South African filmmakers probably have a lot more opportunities to find their voice and create stuff in South Africa. Happiness is the Four-Letter Word, perfect example. That film was made with South African money for South Africans. Yes, you can access it now on platforms, but Bongile could do that because there was support in her home country.
Yeah. So I think maybe just as a follow-up question, how do we get, because I've seen in some countries like South Africa and Nigeria, like even banks will willingly fund film. How do we ensure that we are generating conversation where corporates see this as a viable option, investing in this industry, investing in indie films, which isn't popular in other countries on the continent?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure about banks being willing because
Yeah.
both the banks, I mean, both Afrexim and Bank of Industry, their terms are ridiculous.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Like Bank of Industry wanted people to put up a house as a security. You had to put up security, right?
Yeah.
People come from a socioeconomic background where your parents had multiple houses where they could put up one to make a film. You were never going to access that money. So I think it's even the banks need education on the film economy.
Yeah.
And let's think about it on African countries, even when we were all growing up, cultural education and culture was not what we were pushed to. If you were bright in school, it was sciences or probably just sciences. It was probably just sciences, really, all right? So like, I think we still don't understand, we still haven't seen the value of the cultural economy. I think to a large extent, Afrobeats is probably changing that. People talk a lot about the Nollywood money, but Nollywood really has not created an economy for the people. It's created money for some people at the top of the chain. So I think it's looking at intellectual property, is looking at contracts, and it needs to be from government down. Policies, I think people like Mnet Showmax should not be allowed to pay people what they pay and take all their rights forever whilst they're sitting on a library of stuff that they're not exploiting. So I think it's building the infrastructure from the ground up. And I think the governments need to be involved in that process because brands give you money and there's a lot of brand money in Nigeria for filmmaking, but then the films end up being like a 90-minute advert.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Because brands are also going to give you money because they want the placement and advertising. So I think there's an entire conversation to be had about the cultural economy and the missed opportunity of Africa in not telling its own stories. A lot of the old African films from Semben, all these accomplished African filmmakers, none of them own their work. Yeah. All funded with European money. So it's like the conversation has not even started about the economics, because again, a lot of times when we talk about film and cinema, we talk about it from a talent perspective. It's about stories and writers and directors, and then the people that come in to work with them are mostly foreign producers, mostly French, German, occasionally British, right? And so all those great African movies are all owned by Europeans. It's like, how do we begin to have this conversation about the importance of the ownership of intellectual property and the contribution to the economy that's been missed because we're letting all of this IP we're just giving it away as a gift.
I think following that up, because there was another question on IP that I really liked. And again, audiences, please type your questions and forgive me if I miss any questions. It's not intentional. How can we position ourselves for an IP buyout negotiation so that we get to keep IP rights, or at the very least get a revert back deal where after some years IP comes back? I really like that question from Blessing Patrice Alom.
Well, it depends on who you're dealing with, right? Dealing with generally, if you're dealing with private investors, even for a company, they can give you like a turnaround. They can give you like a time where if I make my money back after 5 years, I'll give you back this amount of shares, etc., etc. I think when it comes to film, especially in the continent, the problem that we're dealing with is that there are people who are taking the bad deals. And because they accept the deals because they can afford to, it sets an expectation with these people that are coming in, and it becomes the norm. So that if you go in and you say, actually, no, Mnet, I'm not giving you all my rights, they don't have to deal with you, because if you say no, there are 20 filmmakers that are going to say yes. Right? So like what's happening now in America, and it's now spreading to Europe, is the strikes, right? So the unions are incredibly powerful, but they negotiate as one body. Right. So for you to get to the stage where you can go in and kind of go, actually, well, you're not buying out my IP and you're not paying me peanuts, you have to do so as a unified voice. So I think I had this conversation with you, Natasha, and I said, if African government said to Mnet and Showmax, you can't do this anymore, they're not going to do it.
Yeah, and it was like,
Yeah,
yeah, you gave me, yeah, that was
yeah.
a really
When
good
Nigeria said
conversation.
to them, if you don't make content here, you have to leave, they started making content
Yes,
in Nigeria. So
yeah.
that's really it. I think again, it goes back down to the fact that we don't have the infrastructure.
Mm.
And somebody needs to start that conversation. Maybe this is a task for African Filter. It's like it needs to go back to government because
Yes.
the local legislation has to support it. So as an
Mm.
individual filmmaker going into negotiating IP buyout, probably nobody's going to listen to you because it's also
Yeah.
power. It's about the power dynamics at play. Like people have to feel like they need you. They probably would not do that to Barry Jenkins. You know what I
Yes.
mean?
Yes.
That's not going to happen.
Yeah. I'm going to take two more final questions, if that's okay, Victoria. One is from Zachariah from Sierra Leone. It's a long one, but I think for context, recently a Nigerian producer showed interest on my project in development, but he's demanding for me to change some characters to fit into to fit in a Nigerian cast, so that he can bring a popular face to the market to market the film. This I understand, but changing characters of this sort, which requires native characters, will affect my story in terms of the message and style. I want to tell the story, the message and style I want to tell the story with. What do you advise?
Okay, so first of all, I know him, so you can email me and we can have a longer conversation.
Zachariah, email Victoria.
Oh, by the way, I did see your email and I was going to reply to you, but we can have a conversation. But again, I talked about that, the value, the perceived value. I can see from Nigerian producers' perspective, Sierra Leone does not really have a market yet.
Yes.
Nigeria has a market that they understand. So they're thinking, if I bring a bunch of actors from Sierra Leone here, and probably nobody in Nigeria is going to go to the cinema. Film house is not going to pick it for distribution. But if I get Bollywood faces, it would sell in Nigeria and probably other African countries. So you've got to make that decision as to whether it's the right thing for you.
Yeah.
Sadly, that it is what it is.
Yeah. So there has to be a give and take of some sort.
It's a give and take. But at the same time, there are a lot of cultural similarities between Nigeria and Sierra Leone.
Sierra Leone. Yeah.
So it may not necessarily be as tragic.
Okay. Actually, Victoria, can we take two more? Because
I'm good. Yeah.
Okay, great. So Sheila Kayuma, is there a market for short films with distribution in Africa?
I'm not aware. I know that Netflix bought some short films, but I think it was like a very specific strand.
Okay.
That they had. I don't know that Amazon hasn't done that yet. I know that Netflix did commission some shorts, and I know at least one South African producer whose short film was acquired by Netflix, but it was a very specific strand.
Yeah.
Netflix is changing their strategy. You know, when they first came in, they were very much about the indies and a safe space of filmmakers, and now they're beginning to be more about the mainstream.
Yeah, very hallmarkish.
Yeah, but I don't know that there are a lot of strengths. I think, I mean, there have been a lot of people developing like apps with MTN and stuff where they were doing short form content. I don't know whether those projects are still around. I think some of the telcos were sort of like doing mobile apps with trailers and shorts, but I don't know whether or not they were paying filmmakers, because again, it's always the monetization.
Yeah.
Even in Europe, there isn't much money in shorts. Shorts are seen as a calling card.
Yeah.
Why then there's pressure for you to get into like the bigger festivals, etc. To be visible. Or using short form to do like a web series. Like there's a very good example now, Dreaming Whilst Black, which was done by a Jamaican filmmaker in the UK, where it was a web series and then it became popular online and then got commissioned by the BBC. They did a pilot, and now it's first season on BBC iPlayer. So so shorts generally are used as a calling card. It's more so a calling card to something bigger and less of something that you can monetize, unless it goes to festivals and wins lots of prizes where there's money attached.
Yeah, and I think Issa Rae had the same strategy with Diary of an Awkward Black Girl. David Leomi asks, what are some examples of the things that funders may want back in return when they've given you a grant?
Grant funders obviously all want their logo stuck on it. That's one of the first things that you're going to see. They might use it for outreach impact depending on what their activity is. they might, and if it's government grants, usually they will want some visibility for their country. So it might be like talent from their country being attached. At times as well, it depends on what their agenda is. Like with NGOs, they will want to hone in on a particular issue. But some of the, like the film funds, like if you take people like Chicken and Egg, they're about supporting women. You know, Birther Fund is about supporting documentaries. So at times it's because they align with whatever issue that you're on. But they might sort of control the final messaging. They might have a lot of say in how it's distributed in the market. And they might have some say in the cuts, but it will vary from one funder to the other. But usually grant funders come on board because there's something about your work that aligns with their mission.
Yeah. I think, so one final question that I really liked from George, and we'll be wrapping things up, you know, any insights into film collaborations in Africa, inter-country collaborations, you know, do you have examples you may know, and what should we put in place to build a collaborative space on films made in Africa? I like that, you know, is that utopic? I wonder.
I think that I mean, there was a film called, it was actually one of the posters I have here called Boda Thieves. It was supposed to be a model for that. I can't remember, it was from some of the southern countries. I think it's South Africa and another country. I think it's really about filmmakers getting together and wanting to work together. I know like Nigeria and South Africa have been trying forever to put together a co-production treaty. Has taken forever. It's just that it was Uganda and SA, Boda Thieves, but I think like with Boda Thieves, it was literally, I remember meeting them at, I think it was a Durban Film Mart, and they were very much like keen on sort of collaborating and trying to promote more Africa collaboration. But I think it's also about the framework being there. You know, it's like a lot of African countries, South Africa has co-production treaties with everybody outside the continent. More other African countries. I really know that they've been trying on the Nigeria one. I think they're also trying something with Kenya, right? But I think if you have co-production treaties, and again, if the government see the value of the cultural economy, you know, because co-productions are really led by public bodies, it's really led by governments. Remember, traveling from one African country to another can be a bit of a pain, right? So again, we don't even have an infrastructure that even allows us to even like holiday. Like I remember when I used to live in Kenya, going back to West Africa, it was quicker to come to Europe and go to West Africa than to just get from Nairobi to Banjul was like a trek. It used to be in 2 days. So I think it's, how do we facilitate those conversations? It's like, there's no film festival or market that all the African filmmakers congregate at, where you then build relationships. Everybody comes to Berlin and then you meet in Berlin or in Cannes. So I think it's building these hubs locally, building them regionally, and lobbying for that to happen. Because I think there are a lot of people around now who want to do it, because I see like there are subgroups with African filmmakers and people are talking a lot. But it's like, you've got to make the money work, but also the trust has to be there.
Agreed.
Yeah, the trust has to be there because you have to collaborate fairly. I've tried doing a lot of collaborations where it's like, okay, you come and work for me, but I own everything. And it's like, well, that's not gonna happen. Right? I think there's a trust, there's a basic trust that's still not there. And for very good reason. There's lots of IP theft, there's lots of exploitation, there's lots of people not paying people properly. So it's, somebody has to do it. There has to be a case study. That there hasn't been much impact after Boda Thieves, but maybe we can see more people trying to do it, and maybe that could help.
I mean, what a beautiful note to end on. And Victoria, do you have any closing remarks that you'd like to share? There are several questions here that people have for you. Can I share your handle here, your Twitter handle, as you're giving your final remarks? Maybe someone would like to reach out to you via Twitter. So I'll just put your handle here. It would be an easier and less spammable platform for people to reach out to you. We'd really love to hear some final thoughts. This has been incredible. I'm about to become a filmmaker, Victoria.
Please do. I mean, to be honest, I'd probably much rather take another question or two rather than give final remarks, because
okay, great, thank you. Then that makes my life easier.
Yeah.
One question here. If the script is mine, how can I make decision makers believe it is mine? Do I have to make a contract with myself? I think maybe here the question is around authenticity and how to prove that this is the author of the script.
But if you're the author of the script, you have multiple drafts, you have
Yeah.
your original outline. I mean, one way that people sort of protect their material is you email stuff to yourself when you do the first draft, just in case there's a dispute about it.
Yeah.
But I don't think anybody will doubt that the script is yours, unless somebody else comes and says there's a problem and that script belongs to me and there's a dispute. Then you both have them prove. But if you've written something, I mean, I've never had to do, the only time I've had to do contract with myself is when I assign the rights of my scripts to my production company, so that my production company can raise money for me. But people have never doubted that the script is mine. I think it's only when you have a dispute and somebody else is kind of going, oh, no. So if you and I, Natasha, talk about an idea, or you talk about an idea, and then I pop up with a script, and then you kind of say, oh, no, that's my script. I told Victoria about it. Then it becomes like, then I have to prove that it was always mine. But I think if it's just yours, I don't think anybody's ever going to doubt that, because even when you talk about the story and you're writing the process, you know that you wrote it. Like, that's not something
there's a paper trail. Emmanuel Orleans would like to know, if you intend to market your movie via digital channels solely, what strategy is still profitable and feasible currently in 2023?
Online. If it's digital, then just go online. All right.
Okay.
Then it's about galvanizing audiences online. That's how people crowdfund. It's about galvanizing audiences online and then signposting them to where you are.
I like that question. Two more questions that I think are really exciting. What tips would you give aspiring filmmakers who are just starting their careers? I'm just beginning, fresh and ready to conquer the world. What should I know?
Find your tribe. Find your tribe, because even if you don't work with them, the one thing that you're always going to need as a filmmaker are people to lean on who understand what you're going through. That is a very, very important thing. You need people who are going to make you feel like you're not alone. What you're going through is not strange.
Victoria, one of the things we keep hearing, especially from Kenyan filmmakers, is that there's a lot of gatekeeping. How can a young filmmaker navigate this space where everyone seems to know everybody, the deals only go to each other's friends? How can a newbie penetrate such spaces?
Get an experienced person to collaborate with. It's like, don't work hard, work smart. Find people who've already done it before, because they will also help you not make the same mistakes that they made. Because the industry, to be honest, a lot of us had to learn the hard way, because people don't really talk about it. Like, you really don't know what's going on. So find experienced people to collaborate with. Get an experienced producer, because an experienced producer will guide you. And also the labs, that's what the labs are good for. Like, when you go through the labs, in a lot of ways, by them selecting you, people might think that you have potential, but it also means that you also go in there and you meet like lots of like-minded people. I think Durban, I do Talents Durban. I did Berlinale Talents, but Berlinale Talents was probably like the best thing for me. It changed my filmmaking, my outlook on filmmaking, my confidence and everything. So I think it's find your network. Find people who've done it before. Maybe this is also a thing for people in these different countries to start your own film networks and meet people, try and do stuff together. Collaborations are hard. Finding people that you really click with is hard. It's a process. You're going to make lots of mistakes, and that's part and parcel of the process. Don't put too much pressure on yourself to be perfect. Like, none of us are perfect. Every film I've made, when I've watched it back, I've cringed. Right? You're always learning. It's a consistent process, but find your tribe. You got, like, the mental toll is it's the biggest thing in filmmaking. It's more so than the financial toll. It's the mental and the emotional toll. It's working on something for 5 years and then it comes out and everybody online says it's shit. Or nobody watches it, or every festival rejects it. It's like you've got to be so strong mentally. I can't even stress how important it is.
Okay. Allow yourself to fail.
I like
Um,
it. Yeah.
the final question is, it's twofold. I'm going to expand it. Is formal training and academics, does it matter in this industry? And two, if it does, are there any places you would recommend for young Africans to get their training from?
Okay, so obviously I'm going to be biased. I work at London Film School, so I'm going to say London Film School.
Yeah.
No, but yes, crafts does matter. Training matters.
Yeah.
Just like you wouldn't be a dentist and take out somebody's tooth without going to medical school, like, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
making it's a craft, right?
Yes.
So definitely get some training, even if short courses. Just try and get the training to help, because it will help you make less mistakes. You're still
Yes.
making mistakes, but the most obvious ones, the training will help you. Sadly, because of the infrastructure that we have in the industry, there's also an elitism to art education. So going to film schools does matter, in the sense that that's where you build your network. And a lot of the festivals and stuff, they do treat people that have been to some of the film schools differently. You know, like I went to NFTS in the UK. I know that it changes the conversation when I say I went to NFTS. Because most times, well, the decision maker I'm talking to is probably an alumni of NFTs, because they're right. You know, if you went to NYU, it makes a difference. If you said you went to UC, it made a difference. If you went to AFI, it makes a difference, because they have a reputation, which means that people give you the quality mark. Right? If you went to London Film School, you must be good.
Yeah. So it's sort of like getting you into the door.
It's getting you into the door. And it's also, you know, like I was reading the other day, was it Noam Baumbach, the guy who did Frances Ha, who is Greta Gerwig's partner, who co-wrote Barbie with her. His first film was produced by Blumhouse, by Jason Blum and Blumhouse. But they were actually roommates in college. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's when the journey,
the connection happened.
Yeah, so a lot of these connections are built in film schools. A lot of people I work with now, I went to film school with, we were on the same labs together, my Balinali talents here. That's where you build. So that's what, it's really become the place where you discover your people.
Yeah.
But it's also a way for the industry to discover you. It's unfair, but sadly, that's part of the rigidity of the history of the cinema industry.
Yeah. And that's the note we are going to end on. Victoria, this has been incredible. I would love to say this has been one of my favorite webinars. I've learned so much. My brain is buzzing with the information. Thank you for giving us your time. Thank you for being so willing to share all the information you've shared with us. We appreciate you. I'd also like to appreciate our audience from all over the world. Thank you for taking the time to be with us here. From myself and the entire team at Africa No Filter, we wish you a lovely evening. Thank you so much and have a lovely evening. Cheers, everybody.